Yes. But more important, this.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Let's start with a bracha on the cake or danishes or cookies. Do bracha together. Baruch atah.
Baruch atah.
Elei. Melech ha'olam. Boirei. Minei. V'zeinus. On the chocolates or the drinks. Baruch atah. Elei. Melech ha'olam. Shehakol. Yihia. B'dvarei.
Pardon?
There was a blind man that was standing over a small patch in the park with his fishing rod out in the water. And next to him is a bucket, empty, and he's just sitting there. And someone walks by. It's about 5:30 p.m. He's on his way home from work. He looks at him and he sees the situation, and he's not really in the ability to. He says, "No, let me take you for dinner. Come with me." And he puts his hand under his arm and he walks him to the restaurant. They sit down and have a wonderful meal. And as they're sitting, he says, "Tell me, sir, how many did you catch today?" He says, "You're number 3." Why do we eat cholent is the topic of tonight's class. And believe it or not, there is a story and history of why we eat cholent. And I'll explain what cholent is as well. Before I do that, though, I want to discuss another question. Why do we eat gefilte fish? On Shabbos, we have a custom that at dinner, Friday night, as well as during the day on Shabbos afternoon, we have fish as part of the meal. Now, Maimonides talks about the order of eating, how you should eat, and he says you should go from the easier to digest to the heavier. I guess dessert is the exception. So we start with the fish course, and then we go on to the meat course. Or if it's salad and something else, you start with the salad, and then you move on. There's a few exceptions, but generally that's the order of the food, of the eating. The idea of fish and why we eat fish on Shabbos, particularly gefilte fish, is what I want to discuss tonight. The Gemara, the Talmud, in the volume that talks about Shabbos, tells us, how do you have pleasure on Shabbos? We have a mitzvah to have what's called oineg. A person should have enjoyment on Shabbos, delight. How do you have delight on Shabbos? Now, there are various different ways, and they're not mutually exclusive, of having delight on Shabbos. But one of them is, as the Gemara tells us, Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel, the son of Shilat, said in the name of Rav, that the way that a person should enjoy Shabbos is with a dish of beets, large fish, and heads of garlic. Rav Chia Bar Ashi said in the name of Rav, even something small, if it's prepared for the sake of Shabbos, then that's considered to be special. Okay? So you satisfy the obligation to have delight on Shabbos because you prepared something specifically, it was a treat for Shabbos. It could be small, it doesn't have to be this whole beets and fish and garlic dish necessarily, which I guess was an example of a delicacy, but it had fish in it. That's what even if it's not that amazing, but you could have something else. What's the something else? What's considered to be something small? So he says, Papa said that a pie of fish hash. Okay, I guess that's a little piece of fish or some type of fish that's not the most expensive fish, but it's something small and it's special for Shabbos. So the two answers the Talmud gives us are both about Shabbos. It's interesting. Now, you could say that the reason is because back then, fish was a delicacy. It was something which was considered to be special. And when they're talking in the Talmudic times of what you should have to enjoy Shabbos, they said fish. This type of fish, that type of fish, but you should have fish. as enjoying Shabbos. There's also an interesting gematria. Gematria are numerical equations. Like we know that the term chai means life. Why does chai mean life? Because in Hebrew, chai, life is chai. But the numerical equation, the equivalent of chai, every letter in Hebrew has a number. Aleph is 1, Beis is 2. So chai is made out of 2 letters. Ches is 8, and Yud is 10, is 18. And now we say 18 represents this number of life, because 18 equals chai. Fish in Hebrew, I don't know how to say fish in Hebrew. It's not fair if you tell us. You felt it, right?
Doug.
Doug, very good. Not dog, but Doug.
Doug.
Dog?
D-O-G.
D-O-G.
Dog.
So saying dog is a fish. The numerical equivalent of dog, Dalet is 4, and Gimel is 3 is 7. Shabbos is what day of the week? 7th day. So there's a hint that on Shabbos you should have that 7, which is that fish. There's a sefer called Peri Tzaddik, or Pri Tzaddik. And this is published by a fellow, by a rabbi, I should say, Rabbi Tzaddik HaKohen of Lublin. He was born as in a Lithuanian family, and later became a chassid. He joined the Hasidic movement and the teachings. He was first had one rebbe, and then later was a disciple of a label Eger. But in any case, he explains as follows. If you think about it, the reason why the primary example of what's a delight on Shabbos is fish, why is that a main food? Is because fish does not have any prohibitions of certain fats. In Torah, part of the animal you could eat, part of the animal has certain fats, fatty parts of it, which is called chelev, and those parts you're not allowed to eat. Chelev, not cholav, which is milk. Chelev is a certain type of fats. And within these parameters of fats, you're not allowed to consume those items on ever. Okay, so the person that slaughters the animal and prepares it, he goes through a process of removing certain parts which are not permitted for consumption. Okay. There's also no sciatic nerve. We know that Yaakov Avinu, after he was wrestling with the angel when he was running away from or getting ready to meet his brother Esav, after being away from him for so long, and he knew that Esav was prepared for a war against him. He had a struggle with Esav's angel, and in the end he hit him in the sciatic nerve, dislocated it. And we have a commandment not to eat from the sciatic nerve. So when you have an animal, part of the process of preparing it, even though it's a kosher animal, but making it fit to eat, is getting rid of the sciatic nerve. A fish has no forbidden fats, you can eat the whole thing. It has no forbidden sciatic nerve, for example, that you have to worry about. In addition, when you slaughter even poultry, a chicken, we have a prohibition that you're not allowed to eat blood. For those that are watching, I did a class a couple of days ago or last week. It's on YouTube. You can see it. Maybe I'll link it in the comments, in the description of why we can't have blood. But the idea is that blood itself is prohibited to eat. And after you slaughter a chicken or a cow or any animal for that matter, we go through a process of removing the blood, soaking and salting. You get rid of the blood. Fish, many people don't realize this, fish blood is okay. There's no prohibition, according to Jewish law, to eat the blood. You may want to rinse it off, but it's not unkosher. Okay? So far a fish is different because it doesn't have prohibited fats, doesn't have a sciatic nerve that has to be removed. It doesn't have the difficulties involved with removing the blood, salting and soaking. And in addition, you can mix fish with whatever you want. Fish is pareve. Now, we don't mix fish with meat. We don't mix fish with chicken. Many have a custom, we don't mix fish with milk either. We're very careful about that. And it's brought in Jewish law. But the reason that's given is not because of a kosher prohibition, but because of a sakana. There's a danger involved with mixing fish and meat. Which, by the way, in Jewish thought, we are more careful about dangerous things than we are about unkosher things or prohibited things. For example, there are cases when, let's use bris for an example, where we're really, really careful, and we say if there's even a remote risk to give a baby a bris on the 8th day, let's wait till they're better. till they're stronger, till they're really, really okay. No risks. It's probably okay. It's not for sure a problem. We're extra careful. But you're going to miss out on the 8th day. It's okay. You can do a bris later. You can't bring a life back. Another example is when back in the day, we were very afraid. We're not so concerned today as much if you have drinks that are left uncovered. Okay. For example, you left your house overnight and you had an open cup of water and you didn't cover it. And there's all different types of insects that go around, and let's just say cats of sorts, whatever it may be, which may drop something poisonous into that dish. And it was a real concern. It's called mashkin migulin, revealed or uncovered drinks. And it's not like food, you can just look at it and see. Not always was there a discoloration. Sometimes your liquid was colored. And we're concerned. So we say, don't drink it. And we're really, really careful. Point is, we're more careful in instances about dangerous things than we are even about kosher, about the law, the prohibition itself, which we're very careful about. So having fish and milk, or fish and meat, is something that we're careful about. But biblically, and even rabbinically, from a kosher perspective, it's not really an issue. So a fish is not something which could become unkosher because you mixed it with the wrong type of food. So it's unique in a way. It's like this unruinable fish from a kosher perspective. It's not easy to mess it up. Hard to mess it up. If you take meat and it was a kosher cow and it was slaughtered correctly, but you didn't salt it within X amount of days, it's over. Or you mixed it with milk, you can't use it. So fish represents this food which can't be mixed and become unholy spiritually, whether it's unkosher or messed up and so on. Shabbos is a similar concept. Shabbos is a holy day. It has a certain purity to it. It's a day which is harder to mess up, if you will. It's a special day. And we celebrate that, recognize that, and appreciate it through having or by having fish. We have a question from someone watching on YouTube, Levi. Blood, dum, fish, dug. Is there a connection with the daled and the dal? That's a great question. Dum and dug. Probably. I don't know what that is, though. Not yet. Huh?
I used to make a fish with my puppy. And she used to tell me, I have to have 3 kinds of fish. I have to have whitefish, pike.
Whitefish, pike, and carp. Okay. There's many ways to make it, but okay.
Later on, I went into the world of the Gentile, and I remember I went to graduate school and people were fishing. I had a dog, and the dog would run away, and he'd come back with this terrible smell. I thought he probably got to a skunk or an animal. What he did was, he would find carp, because people thought the carp were dirty.
They throw it away.
And they would throw it on, they didn't want to even put it back in the water.
Okay.
So it's not only fish, but it has to be a fish with scale. Right?
Yeah, it has to be kosher fish, fins and scales. We could talk more about it, about the specification of what makes a fish kosher. But fish has this special quality that it doesn't mix with other things, rendering it unkosher. Shabbos has that purity and quality to the day as well. Another difference. Humans and animals were created from the ground. When it talks about creation, Hashem created the person from the earth. He formed Adam from the Adama, from the earth. Fish and water mammals come from, it's called mammals, water animals, if you will, come from the water. They don't come from the ground, from the earth. However, they have to remain in the water to survive. We, as people, even though our source is earth, we don't have to be attached to the ground to survive. Unlike a fish, we could leave the ground, hopefully we do, and still be okay. We still live. So we're not attached to our source in order to survive. We have roots, but we don't always have to be connected to them. A fish represents the concept he's always connected to his roots, to its roots. And it invokes the spirit of Shabbos. Because what does Shabbos do? Shabbos reconnects us to our source. A whole week we're running around, we're busy, we're doing stuff. It's a mitzvah to work 6 days, rest on the 7th. Many of us may forget that part of the mitzvah. It's work 6 days, rest on the seventh. But the idea is that on Shabbos, we plug in to our source, to our roots, to where we come from. We dig a little deeper in ourselves. We spend time in prayer and learning. It's a special time. That's the specialty of Shabbos, how it's connected to fish. Fish also doesn't have that separation from its source. Okay, so that's one reason, or one element of fish, that it represents the idea it doesn't get mixed and become unkosher. It doesn't have parts of it which are forbidden to eat. It's always submerged in its roots and its source, which is a very appropriate thing. But there's another reason. Stuffed fish, in general, gefilte fish. How would you translate gefilte in English? Gefilte, it's filled. Okay? Gefilte, it's filled fish, stuffed fish. Thank you. Back in the shtetl, it's about 200 years old, gefilte fish. I mean, not the ones that we have, it's pretty fresh, but gefilte fish is about 200 years old. And it came, or it began, in the shtetl, when people did not necessarily have enough means to enjoy luxury and abundance. So when you have fish, or any food for that matter, you have to use out every last part of it. And fish, which was a luxury food, and they only primarily had it on Shabbos, they want to get the most out of that fish. So you remove the inside of the fish, you grind it or chop it, and you add to it condiments, maybe some flour, a couple vegetables, a few other things, which expands your item. And then you put it back into the skin of the fish and cook it that way. So then when you slice the fish after it's cooked, there's more, and the family that's eating it could enjoy a good, let's just say, an increased amount of fish. So it had that technical component that it was a good food to use because you could expand it and make more from it. But there's another benefit from this. That benefit is that there's a law on Shabbos known as boirer. Boirer means we can't pick or sort the negative out of the positive, bad from good. If you have wheat, you have kernels, and you have it's called the outside of it. You can't separate them. You can't get rid of the bad, take the good. When you eat food, you also have that concern. If you're eating nuts and there's the shell of the nut, you can take the nut out of the shell, but you can't remove the shell from the pile of nuts. Be careful. The same thing is when you're eating food that has bones in it. You eat the meat off the bone, and if the bone's there, you have to be careful you're not pulling the bone away. You're taking the bad from the good. When you eat fish, you have to pull the bones out. And you have to be careful that you're not pulling the bone out of the fish, but you're taking the fish off the bone. And with fish, it's hard because they're small bones. So you have to know what you're doing, how you properly do this on Shabbos. So in a sense, when you have gefilte fish, which is boneless, you have that advantage that you don't have to worry. Anyone that's sitting on the table, whether they know the laws of Be'er, they don't know, or they know but they don't know how to do it, they're fine. So it works amazingly. It works spiritually because it's the type of fish which it doesn't mix with other things, so it represents purity. It's always attached to its source. So it has that benefit of reminding us to be connected with our roots. It is economically beneficial because you could increase the amount, and halachically it's very helpful because you don't have to worry about the be'er part, getting rid of the what's the right word, the bones and so on. Plus, it tastes good, and if you add a little chrein, then it really tastes good. And I see now they have sharp chrein, extra sharp, and triple sharp. So it's a lot of ways to go about it. Let's see if you get a little better lighting by turning it this way. Herring? Fresh mark. But that's fried, right? It's I am.
Even with the bones, right?
Chile.
Okay, so well, let's go to our central question tonight, and that's what's the background of cholent? Why do you have cholent on Shabbos? The family was getting together and at their grandmother's house, and the bubby prepared food, and the mothers told the kids, well, did everyone make a bracha? Did everyone make a blessing before you ate? And little Maishi says, we don't have to make a bracha here. Bubby knows how to cook. So why do we eat cholent on Shabbos? First of all, what's cholent? Cholent is a food, we'll call it loosely a stew, which is prepared with meat, very often, potatoes, beans, barley, some carrots, onions. It's a stew. It's put onto the stove or a crock pot today about Friday afternoon, let's say, sometime before sunset. And almost 24 hours later, the next afternoon, is when you come home from shul and you enjoy it for lunch. It's cholent. Sephardic tradition calls it chamin. Chamin means hot, and it's spicy, and there's chickpeas in there, and rice in there, and other beautiful things, sometimes eggs. And they have their traditions of how it's done, but it's a similar concept that you have a stew of sorts on the stove before Shabbos begins, and it sits there all the way till the next day, and you enjoy it. And it's really a delicacy.
It's spicy.
The Sephardic version is spicy. You could add whatever you want. People add ketchup to their cholent in advance. They put hot dogs in there. There's many different family traditions of cholent, right? No?
Yeah.
Spicy. It's good. But what's the background of this? So we have a law in the Torah that says le'sevaru eish. It's forbidden to kindle a fire in your dwellings on Shabbos. You can't light fire. What does this verse mean? It's forbidden to kindle fire on Shabbos. So one way is to learn that the Torah is telling you can't have any fire burning in your home on Shabbos. So extinguish the candles before Shabbos, turn off the lights, make sure your oven's off, the heat is down. No fire burning on Shabbos. That's actually how the Karaites interpreted this. Now, this was a group of people who only believed in the written Torah. They discounted completely the oral tradition. Anything the sages said, they implied as man-made, and they didn't accept it. And they learned that this law of don't kindle fire on Shabbos, don't have a fire burning on Shabbos, means you can't have it burning at all, even if it started before Shabbos. Now, our sages explained to us that you could have a fire lit in your home on Shabbos if it was lit before Shabbos. If you want to have the fireplace on to have a warmth, or today lighting, or other forms of electricity which are running already, that's fine. You could have your stove burning on Shabbos too. It's okay, as long as it was lit before Shabbos began. Now, these Karaites, they had a very boring Shabbos, okay? Because you can't have warm food at all. Tea, coffee, cholent, all this stuff doesn't exist. You can't have anything. The only way you could have warm food is if right before sunset you took it off the fire and extinguish it. It's only the way we understand it, the correct way, the way the rabbis have taught, is that if you put it onto the stove before Shabbos and it's already cooked, and it's a continuous burning, and you just take it off. You can't mix or, God forbid, adjust the fire or anything like that, but you could take it off the fire and then you could use it, then that's fine. It's okay to have that item. But otherwise, the next morning, there is nothing. There's no hot coffee. Can you imagine? There's no cholent and so on. So what the Jewish people said was, let's create or develop the type of food which could sit on a stove for a long time, and let's make sure to have something hot on Shabbos to negate the opinion that says that you're not allowed to have any hot food on Shabbos, essentially. That you can't have any fire burning on Shabbos. So to make sure that people don't misunderstand and say, well, it says to have a fire burning, we said, let's make sure that we eat hot food. And people will say, eating hot food on Shabbos, how did he do this? Well, the rule is that if it's on before Shabbos, that's okay. And that's what we do. It's a we call it a staple tradition But it's a very important concept, not only because it's delicious, but also because it is bringing out this law, this idea of how important it is. I want to share a story about Shabbos food. There was once a fellow who owned an inn. His name was Moshe. All the innkeepers were called Moshke. And many of these landowners in Ukraine and parts of Russia, they prided themselves with their Moshke that they had. Moshe, Moshke. And they would collect rent from them. In many cases, it was difficult. They couldn't pay the rent. They would be late and threatened and thrown into jail and dungeons and whatever else. These landowners had tremendous control over people that lived there, especially if he was Jewish and he was working for them in a sense, or leasing from them. But in our story, he was very friendly and they got along well. And he actually came to visit this Jew multiple times. And he came to his house Friday night, and he was sitting at the dinner table, and he would enjoy it. It was delicious food. He filled the fish and other things, challah. Well, one Friday, there was a guest at the inn. No one knew who he was. He's sitting there. They make kiddush. The Paritz, this landowner, was there. And after kiddush, they get up to wash their hands for challah. And they sit down, and the first course, which is fish, is served. And they serve gefilte fish. It goes around the table, and this landowner takes a piece of fish. He sticks his fork in the fish to eat it, and this guest faints. He lets out a shriek. Ah! He faints. So they revive him. Everyone stops. They sit back down at the table, and they're about to go again. And this Paritz puts his fork in the fish, and he wants to eat it. And again, a shriek, and this guy passes out.
Same guy?
After the third time, they revived him. The Paritz said, listen, maybe tonight's not my night. He left. As soon as he left, this fellow, this unidentified guest, grabs the piece of fish on the Paritz's plate and eats it. Now, this Moshke was completely floored. What in the world is going on? You're fainting, you're eating his fish. Tell me what the story is. And he insisted, so he told him. I was sitting at the table, and I want you to know that once there was a fellow who lived a life to Gesund. He lived a life in this world, and he passed away. And when he came to heaven, they judged him, and they said that certain parts of his life or his behaviors or his choices were not appropriate. And instead of sending him to be punished in purgatory and in hell for a process of several months, they decided to give him a second chance. And they're going to reincarnate him. He's going to come back into the world and have another chance to do right. But he complained, the soul. And the soul said, listen, if I go back into this world, maybe I'll mess up even more than my first life. It's free choice. Who knows? I did pretty good, but some problems, I don't have to go back down. So I said, you know what? We have an alternative. We'll put this soul into a fish. How am I going to be elevated if I'm in a fish? How am I going to get that spiritual holiness that I'm missing? So the angel said, you'll go into a fish, and if the fish gets taken out and used for a mitzvah, with a blessing and so on, for good things, whether it's at a Shabbos meal, or it's friends getting together for the right reasons, eating together brings people closer, they make a bracha on it, it's positive, not just glutinous because I enjoy the taste, not just for fun, you as the soul that's in that fish, that spark, you'll have your elevation. So that soul was placed into a fish, which is a tremendous pain for a soul to have to come back into the world after it left, especially into the life of a fish. And this guest is continuing his story. And he says, this soul came into a fish. And the fish could be anywhere, right? And it ended up in a Jewish town. And they fished it out. Now, fish, Jewish town, anyone could get the fish. It ended up being bought by a Jewish person on a Friday or Thursday afternoon. And they're going to prepare this fish for Shabbos. Everything is going great. And, some of the fish gets thrown out, didn't make it. It's the beginning of the fish, the end of the fish. The spirit, the soul, is in the piece of fish. It made it all the way through the pot and everything. It's on the Shabbos table. And the kiddush was done. Challah was cut. They're ready to go. And then there was one person at the table which wasn't observing Shabbos. He was here just to enjoy gefilte fish. And when he put his fork in the fish, that piece, I heard the soul shriek. And I heard the soul like, no, I'm going to have to do this all over again. So I passed out. I didn't mean to disturb your Shabbos, but I couldn't handle the anguish of that soul. But you should know, I took it and I ate it, and now everything is fine. Now, this is a story that shows you the idea of reincarnation, and the power of everything that you do has impact. And everything has to be done mindfully. And when you make a bracha, you should know it impacts yourself, it impacts those around you, it impacts everything. It's a holiness that's being brought. Everything we do has a process of uplifting sparks. I don't mean souls and reincarnation per se, but there's godly sparks all over, and everything that we do elevates them, brings it to a higher level, and takes us along on that journey as well. Any questions on cholent or gefilte fish or anything else that we discussed?
So all of these things relate back to the spiritual nature.
Fish and cholent is very physical.
Yeah. So, and this is a story that something happened to me.
So
Was that a
we'll
place?
just, before you go to the story, any questions that anyone has? Because we'll do. Okay. For those that are watching, please subscribe, share the video. If you have questions now or on the replay, you're welcome to leave it in the comments, and we'll attempt to address them. Thanks for joining. Have a great evening. A wonderful Erev Shabbos.
That's it?